everyone. This is Shobhaa Day. I'm so delighted to be in conversation with an author I greatly admire. It's Anindita Ghose with a brilliant, brilliant book. I hope all of you can see it clearly. I loved The Illuminated. I just have to say it up front. I've already conveyed it to the author. And I'll tell you why I loved it. Because there was so much passion in it. It's a debut novel. The voice is authentic. The world she has created is authentic. And of course, the dynamics between the two protagonists, the mother, Shashi, and her daughter, Tara, had me very intrigued, mainly because the mother-daughter relationship has to be the most complicated relationship on earth. So I want to begin by congratulating you, Anindita. It's a fantastic read. So I want to ask you the first question: that do you think men and women write in voices that can be identified instantly from the first page? And does it matter to the reader whether it's a woman writing it or a man writing a novel?
Right. That's a great question to just dive into. But before I do, I just want to say, it's such an honor for me to be, in conversation with you, Shobhaa. I've met you. I mean, I've interviewed you once around 15 years ago for my first job. And I think most people know you as a columnist. I've read you growing up and a fashionista. But the fact that you've written over 20 books, you've done that while doing, your weekly writing, bringing up children, doing everything else that you do, including running an imprint for a long time. It's just an inspiration. So I don't mean to come across as a complete fangirl, but I mean, I am.
Thank you.
And it's a real honor for me that you've read the book and you've liked it and that we are doing this, that you're kind of in conversation with me. Yes. And thanks so much also for our chat the other day. So to answer your question, I actually do think there is such a thing as a male voice and a female voice. And I also think that maybe only in recent years, we are becoming a little more conscious of the gender of the author and who's writing and kind of consciously looking at how that impacts the text. Because to be honest, growing up, when I look back, I think most of the books I read were by middle-aged male authors. That was what was presented to us as literature. That was the high literature, when I was in my teens. So whether it's Anton Chekhov or even Rushdie, Jonathan Franzen, Julian Barnes, all of them. So we kind of began to see the minutiae of, the details of middle-aged men and their lives and their dilemmas as literature. And when a woman writes about it or thinks about things that matter to her, that was, categorized as various things, which you would, of course, be, well too aware of. This is something you've commented on in the past. Women writing about things that are close to them becomes chick lit, but men writing about things is not lad lit. So I think that there is such a thing as a male and female voice, perhaps from the choice of subjects, but also with the intimacy with which that men and women, approach stories. I think women do tend to go a little more in detail. There's a little more intimacy in women's writing, I think, than male writing. Broadly, of course, there are exceptions to the rule.
Interestingly enough, I believe it was V.S. Naipaul who had said perhaps it was at the Jaipur Lit Fest, that he can tell from the very first line, and he said it kind of dismissively, it was a misogynistic statement. He can tell from the first line that it's a woman who's writing the book. And everybody hailed him for saying something that everybody thought was a great insight from an intellectual about women's writings and the categories. And at the same time, during that same festival, there were women out there who felt very strongly about being categorized and didn't like the idea of being labeled a woman writer. I mean, writers are writers. We don't necessarily qualify other professionals. We don't say woman lawyer, or we do, I think, or a woman artist, painter, etc. So how do you feel about this whole gender thing in publishing? Have you experienced it? In one of your characters, there's a beautiful line that is Dolly. I liked her character a lot, and I wish there was more of Dolly in the book. And you said that she is a victim of her own willful beauty. Lovely, lovely phrase. You feel a lot of like extremely good-looking ladies like yourself are victims of that kind of putting you in a box. Your beauty is more like an obstruction because they can't see beyond it. And your book will always be seen through that kind of a highly glamorized prejudice lens.
I mean, I think I've had discussions with so many other women who are, bringing out their first books, and there is always a little bit of confusion about how you are packaged or how the book is marketed. There is that concern, even when what you're writing is, say, categorized as literary fiction. I was telling you when we spoke, before this chat, that I kind of got nervous that I won't be taken seriously if I have all my, Vogue pictures with me in designer clothing on Instagram. So I kind of went and archived. I learned how to do that recently. I went and kind of hid all those pictures, and I've recently undone that, because I realized that no matter what you present, no matter how much you kind of curate what you present, people will interpret you or your history or who you are the way they want to. So you just have to be happy with who you are. But to your point about the men and women's voice, I think what we are talking about for some women could also be, it could also be a pejorative, as in they could think that no, it's neutral, why do we have to bring in gender, men's writing and women's writing is the same. But my point is, if it is different, what's the problem with that? Why can't we embrace that? It will be different because your experiences in the world are different. Things that are important to a writer, things that really move them, is what a writer can write about best. If for a woman that is childbirth, or a husband who is cheating on her, or whatever, if those are the things that move her the most, she will write about that. So I think this fight to say that everything is equal and pages are gender neutral is also in a way already implying that we think that if it's women's writing, it must be inferior, hence let's try to be neutral. So I think there is that. But yeah, I do feel that a lot of women think a lot about how their books will be categorized, how they are perceived. I have male friends who are writers, and those are not their concerns. Their concerns, the conversations I have with them are very different. It's about what the advance will be for the Netflix adaptation, or where are they going to teach, or how do they get the next 3-book deal. The conversations I have with women are a lot about, should I be doing this, or will I be considered less serious if I do this, all of that. So I feel the concerns we have are different. And also, to be honest, the women I'm having the conversations with and me, we are fairly empowered in the scheme of things, right? We are women of privilege who've had, jobs, we've had positions of power, and we are still insecure. We are still having these conversations. It's almost a bit sad, so.
I totally agree with you, but when you mention marketing of books, for example, social media is now playing a huge role in the marketing of books during the pandemic. And I see this as the future in any case. So are you comfortable with the whole aggressive positioning, marketing? Does it seem a bit too mechanical for you? Because I'm sure you've attended book launches in the past, which are these glitzy, fabulous events at which the authors felt applauded and feted, and got to meet other writers, you got to meet readers at lit fairs or at the launches. But now the isolation of the pandemic and a novel such as yours, which is so intimate, being launched virtually, do you think that whole experience is something that is over, that's past, that this is the future? It's going to be all algorithms based. Your next book deal, everything will be based on how many likes you have, what a Twitter following you may have. Are you working Instagram the way you need to? Does any of this bother you, the kind of management of your image, your book?
It does. I mean, it does feel very unfortunate that I've attended lit fests, I've interviewed authors, and the year that my first book is out, we're doing this. I wish we were speaking live on a stage in Jaipur, right? So it does feel, or at the Times Fest in Bombay or Delhi. So it does feel unfortunate, but I mean, I believe that there's no point kind of whining about change. So we have to go with the flow. Again, these questions about how much an author should be posting about their book, how much an author should be retweeting praise. These are all, again, doubts and questions. And I do feel that women tend to be discussing this more than men, because men just go out and, do whatever they want. I thought, should you be restrained? Should you share everything? But I also feel that, publishing a book, it's an industry. There are many other people involved. There's, your agent, your publisher, booksellers. So I feel also that, it's not my personal blog. It's not my father kind of self-publishing my book. So I feel a sense of duty that, okay, I've written my book and these people have, bet on me. And I need to do my duty in doing everything I can to spread the word, or to get a wider audience to learn about my book. So again, there are authors who feel that, somebody with an internet connection or somebody who tweets all day cannot be writing a book. I do feel that there are phases in the writing life. You've written, over 20 books. I'm sure you know that you're not actively writing, every hour of every day of the year. There are phases in which you're in deep drafting mode. There are phases when you're editing. There are phases when you're promoting that book. So I feel my book has just been out. It's been, less than 2 months. It's 1.5 months. Right now, it's my duty to speak about the book, attend whatever my publishers want me to attend, have conversations like this. Of course, I have been picky, because it's also exhausting to speak about, it's something that's so intimate and dear to you, that if you're having a silly conversation or a conversation at a very superficial level, you're not serving anyone. So I think you have to be picky, but there are phases. So this is a phase where I speak about my book. I do everything I can. I Instagram, I tweet how much is humanly possible and then there will be a phase when I retreat and say, I'm writing now. And so far, I must say, I've had a pretty good experience with my publisher. They haven't forced me to, post something that I don't want to, or so it's been manageable so far. It must be hard when you have, 10 books out or 3 books out together. I'm sure that's hard, but I just have 1 book, so I can't really complain at the moment.
I would say what's harder is you become a performing flea at these circuses and at the promotional events. You go from city to city on the book tours. From bookshop to bookshop, and that is really exhausting, because people come with so many preconceived ideas about the book and about you, and you have to perform. But like you, I feel the same way exactly. It's an obligation, it's a duty I owe to my book, and if I don't go flat out and promote it, no one else is going to, and it is something that I'm proud of, and I'm obliged to do that. And publishers and your agents, all of us work together as a team towards achieving the best possible exposure. So I'm fine with that. What about critics? Do you find how men look at your book, have looked at this book, and how women have perhaps reviewed it? There's a completely different perspective coming into the characters or the structure of the book.
Right. So I feel most features journalists in India, as you would know, they are all young women in their kind of mid-20s. And my book being about, there's a 25-year-old character and her mother. So I feel a lot of young women have connected very strongly with the book. Most of the people who interviewed me early on were women. The fact that there have been studies, we spoke about that, like Guardian published a whole article about an actual survey done with a vast number of readers, that women read books by men and women, but men tend to read books by men. So as a woman writing a book in India, one does expect that only women are going to read your book. And I think the audience for fiction is largely women. So I was actually quite surprised and quite grateful that there were, the big boys were reviewing my book, and even, one of them wrote a very scathing review as well, which was very entertaining, because he reviewed fiction as non-fiction in News Laundry. So that was fun. But I mean, the fact that men were even reading and responding to the book, I mean, I think the bar for engagement with male readers and male critics is so low that the fact that male critics were even engaging was what made me very happy. I have a question for you, Shobhaa, before you ask me something again, is that as somebody who has been writing now consistently over 3 decades, and since you asked this question about social media, and you're very active on social media now, you're also, you have your own columns as platforms as well. So you're quite, accessible. But how do you think it is for you as an author bringing out books in 2021 when readers have direct access to you, when they can tweet to you and Instagram to you and say, ma'am, we loved your book, versus 30 years ago when there was more of a distance between you and the reader? Do you kind of miss that a bit? Do you miss that kind of mystery, the sense of remove from your reader?
Well, to start with, I must clarify that I don't engage with anybody on Twitter.
Okay.
I say what I need to, and it ends there. Even on Instagram, it's not that I am actively in conversations with people who are responding to what I may have posted. Facebook is a private account, so there's no question. It's largely a community of writers. So when, for example, this book, which was published during the pandemic, collection of short stories, and I enjoyed that because it was a totally different alien experience for me, for my publishers, for the world. I mean, we were in the midst of a pandemic, and I was very clear that I wanted to write these stories as the pandemic was, well, as we were all a part of it. It was very organic. So there were 26 stories that I wrote, and I was clear that we had to have them published like 4 stories a week, and Simon and Schuster were good enough to do that. And it would come out as a physical book after. So it was an experience which I'll never, ever forget. Writing lockdown stories during the lockdown, having it published. That feedback I really enjoyed because I was also doing a daily blog, a video blog, a blog, whatever it's called.
Yes.
And those interactions, so we were getting instant feedback all the time from someone who just read one of the stories. It was a different experience. I liked engaging, but I'm not sure that I would want to go back to that. And I hope the pandemic is over sooner than later, and we never ever have to publish our future books in such terrible times, because it's very hard to focus on the publishing and the promotion of a book when around you there's so much despair, and you feel kind of a little shameless saying, I'm going out there and I'm hustling and I'm saying, please buy my book because you've written it. But you just feel the environment at that time is not conducive to that kind of promotion. So I'll see down the line how it works, but I still prefer interactions, direct interactions with I can read faces. It's a different energy you get at a book launch. Even at an intimate book launch in a store where there may be 30 people, but you're still engaging with a human being and not a screen.
Right. Right.
So to go back to your book, you talked earlier about how we come from a privileged, or you're speaking about yourself, a privileged background. We're empowered women. We've all held, fairly responsible jobs, high-profile jobs. Your book is also about a certain section of Kolkata society, very upper crust. And then there's the second layer where the house help plays a very prominent part in providing a counter narrative. So was that a kind of a literary device to give the two perspectives of privilege as well as those who work for us and see maybe us very differently from how we see ourselves?
Right. Shobhaa, more than the Illuminated being a book about feminism or about gender, for me, it is a book about privilege, and gender also being a privilege. So the man, the most privileged character in the entire scheme, because he's upper class, upper caste, and rich, professionally successful, and he's male. Robi Malik, the kind of patriarch, he dies on page 1, and the story is about his wife and his daughter, who are as privileged as him, except that they're women. So I think I was very interested in exploring this idea and various levels of privilege, and Purnima, who is their house help, and kind of questioning, because I think we have this sense that women, and you've of course questioned that in your books a lot as well, that just because you're a woman from a privileged family doesn't mean that you necessarily know your mind and you have it all easy. You can be a woman who has a master's degree and has all the money in the world and still be in shackles. And you can be a woman from the Sundarbans who has, just nothing really to her name, but who knows her mind. So I think for me, in the whole book, it's Purnima, who is a woman who is kind of lowest in this kind of chain of privilege, but she is the most fully realized character. And I was interested in that because there's been a lot of conversation also recently about what kind of Indian books get published abroad. And I think in the West, they do like the same narratives of either poverty, crime, or women who are being raped, violence, like a very over-the-top oppression. And the thing is that you can be oppressed even when you're living in a South Delhi mansion and have everything you want. So I was interested in kind of turning that on its head and playing with the idea of how a woman of privilege could be not empowered, and a woman who is to the world doesn't have privilege is actually very privileged because she's free to do as she pleases.
Purnima's character was definitely very, very solid. And I liked her unsolicited advice that she frequently intervenes in affairs during family gatherings. And you talked about Robi Malik being the patriarch and the privileged man with his degrees. And both the men in the book, whether it's him or it's Amitabh Dhar, are exactly alike. It's like two extremely vain, egotistical, selfish, self-centered, madly in love with themselves kind of men. And the women in their lives are peripheral or serving some kind of a purpose which suits them as because they don't even think beyond themselves.
Right.
So there's a lot of rage and anger in both the women. Shashi's is less pronounced or less expressed, whereas her daughter, Anna fixation on Amitabh Dhar and her anger is expressed in sexual terms. Now, do you feel that, do you feel this way generally about men that who are accomplished, who are good looking, who are educated, successful, tend to be sort of these kind of monstrous fellows who exploit the ladies in their lives, sexually and otherwise?
Right, it reminds me of the opening lines of Anna Karenina, where Tolstoy writes that all happy families are the same. So I feel all privileged men are the same. They think of themselves as the center of their world, and they are brought up that way. So, and I think from, say, AD's point of view or from Robi's point of view, again, I think it's very easy. It's much easier to write cardboard villains, like, men who are just horrible monsters, cruel, so I was and that's easy. So I was very keen to actually, if you look at these men and if they perceive themselves, they are not bad men. A lot of people might actually think of them as ideal men. I had women reading the book who wrote to me saying, I wish I had a husband like Robi Malik. I'm like, have you read the full book? She's like, yeah. So, so there are people who think they are good men, but yet, as one one reviewer put it, that they are good. It's just that they occupy so much space that the women in their lives have to shrink. They can't live their full lives because these men just fill the room. And I thought that was a great metaphor. And are Robi Malik and Amitabh Dhar inherently evil? I don't think so. I think they are also a factor of how they've been brought up, how they've been treated by their families, So, and I think when you don't point, when you don't shine a light to their small misdeeds, over time, it becomes something large and monstrous, as you say. So I think that's what Me Too was about, in the sense that, a lot of people complain that one man could have been a rapist, but another man could have just, flirted with an employee. So how can you put them all on the same boat? But the thing is that those small infractions, those small violations over time can become something really big unless you shine a light on it. So I think Amitabh and Robi were on their way to becoming really monstrous characters. They're probably not monsters yet, and Robi dies, so in the scheme of the book. But that's why it's important to speak about even the small violations, because it can become really big one day.
Yes, but I felt, correct me if I'm wrong, that Robi, yes, had a lot of redeeming qualities and was a typical upper middle class Bengali uh, uh, man from a certain lofty background. We know several of those. So I could completely get Robi. But Amitabh, I mean, there's nothing. Uh, he's irresistible in the way Rhett Butler can be called irresistible. So self-aware of his power over women and not at all self-conscious about exploiting that power. So it is in his case, I thought the relationship was really all about power and little else, and possibly sensing Tara's insecurities, which she takes a lot of trouble to disguise and hide, and behind that facade of her Sanskrit erotic poetry and her research, she still wants something which she could easily achieve on her own without him. So her self-worth is linked to his approval. And now I felt that was a kind of a vulnerability in Tara. Was that what you intended? That she should be behind all of it, a tough titty act. She should be this little girl looking for approval. I mean, she adored her father, hero worshipped him. And then comes this guy who's a domineering figure in her life and doesn't give her the opportunity to go to Chicago. But did she need him to go to Chicago in the first place?
Right. I think Tara is somebody who seeks approval and praise over everything else, because that's what she's seen up. She admires her father, who thrives on validation and praise. And, you know, when you hero worship someone, you want to be like them. So I think, and Tara is not perfect. I think, yeah, her thing is that she adores, and her mother, Shashi, kind of says that in the book, that Robi and Tara, they chase adulation, because their inner self-worth is low. It actually is reliant on what people think of them. So it's kind of it's a typical narcissistic trait. Actually, I've studied a lot of, you know, narcissistic personalities and read a lot about this, that often people who behave very grand and, you know, have a lot of braggadocio in public, they are deeply insecure, and they act in that way to kind of balance an innate sense of insecurity. And with Tara, you know, she's only 25. We've both been 25. You know, you've had daughters. So I think the thing is that she's learning who to be, and there will be some missteps along the way. We've had a lot of talk about unlikable narrators or unlikable characters. And I think in no way was I trying to write Tara as this ideal woman or woman that we should aspire to. She's very hypocritical. She talks about feminism, but she's not sympathetic to her own mother or to the women around her. You know, she believes in there's a lot of talk. And to be honest, I've seen a lot of it comes from having met a lot of women like that, and met young people like, but behaving completely in a different way. So I think she's trying to figure out, and I think she wants approval, which is why she needed that. She could have very well had her father pay to go to Chicago, but I think she wanted that validation of being chosen by him. To kind of answer your question. But one thing I want to say, Shobhaa, and I want to ask you that same question, is that the fact that I'm a journalist and then writing fiction, a lot of people ask, how does that change the way you look at writing? I think for me, the biggest thing is that writing fiction taught me to be less judgmental, because in the kind of journalism, you know, in the opinion space or in feature, there's a lot of hand wringing about this is right, this is wrong. You have to have a quick opinion. You have to know exactly what you think is right or wrong. But in writing fiction, I felt that I could open that up much more. So even when you speak about Amitabh, I was trying to be very clear in leaving room for his villainy open. So I did try to do, you know, there are 2 or 3 pages that explain how he viewed the whole incident with Tara. From his point of view, he's a 52-year-old man who thinks this girl came to his room. That is how most 52-year-old men think. So from his point of view, I was trying to give readers an insight into Amitabh Dhar's thought process also, so that there's still some thinking to do on the part of the reader on what really happened or who's right or wrong. So I feel that writing fiction made me more keen to inhabit different characters and be less judgmental. And I wonder if that's something you felt as well, as somebody who is moving, or you edited several magazines, you commissioned some of the best writers of your generation, and then you started writing your book. So did you feel a shift in the way you were you judging your characters? Because your characters too did some pretty questionable things. They were not perfect. Did you judge them at any point, Shobhaa?
Well, for me, fiction is something so liberating. It really gives you the opportunity to free yourself, as you said, from your journalistic world and of judgments. And there are no taboos in fiction, I believe. It's just you and the characters that you dream up, create, and the opportunity you get to define them and grow them as the book gets going. Yes, you will inhabit different skins, different minds, different so many things. It's also a lot of fantasy, which is not possible when you're writing columns or in journalism. But I tend to compartmentalize. I've always done that. And when I'm writing my columns, which I write 4 a week, and each one is for a different kind of audience and a different age group. The demographics of all the columns are different. It's all very, very watertight. So I am a columnist when I'm writing a column, and I'm a fiction writer when I'm writing fiction, and I'm a non-fiction writer when I'm writing non-fiction. So it's a discipline which I think I have acquired and over the years, because otherwise it can lead to sort of an overlap, and I don't want one area to kind of seep into the other area, because then I will lose my focus and I will lose track. So the characters live with me very comfortably. Once I'm done with the book, they're gone. I don't live with the book. Once it's out there, it's out there. And so different writers, I think, adopt different techniques. I'm not possessive about my books, my characters, my writing. None of it. Once it's done, I'm done with it. I don't know how you feel. Do you feel an emotional attachment right now to your book? Are you emotionally invested in the book?
No, since I wrote it over, 5 years. Yeah. And I was, because I had jobs, and, I had male writer friends who told me, just write at work. Why are you being such a nerd? Just write, go to your cabin and write your book. Let other people edit the magazine. But I think, I don't know, maybe women tend to be more responsible. I couldn't do that. I was very invested in my day job. So I wrote, at night after I came back home. It was 12 to 2 or weekend. So it took me some time. I hope to write the second book faster. So when I wrote it over 5 years, you're really growing with your characters. You're so close to them. But honestly, after that period, I was very happy to send them out into the world. Some part of me will always be very protective about my characters. So I know that Shashi, the mother, is a very lovable person. Everybody loves her. Tara, on the other hand, I'm worried about her because, I think it's easy for her to be misunderstood. And I feel being understood is more important than being loved. So I want people to understand Tara. But ultimately, they are on their own journey now, and I'm really daring to write my next. So I've kind of let go. And what I find very interesting is that each reviewer or each conversation, each person comes to the book with what their baggage is or their lens is. So they have completely different takeaways, completely different perspectives. And that's why it's so, for me as a writer, it's also very interesting to see how other people are interpreting the book. But I'm not defensive about it, or, I'm happy really for it to be out at this time, yes.
But the person I fell in love with in the book was Vivek. I think we all need a Vivek in our lives. Someone so completely wonderful and gentle and giving and philosophical and whatever spiritual path he's seeking, I found him utterly charming and a kind of a non-threatening male character in a book which is otherwise has fairly toxic men, including the guy who runs the restaurant in Dharamsala, isn't particularly charming. Vivek was the balancing factor as far as the main characters were concerned. But you mentioned you've taken 5 years to write the book, and that's a long time to stay with characters. Did you kind of, at some stage, decide, okay, I'm done, I need to finish this book? Because the ending to me, had I been your editor, I would have been more ruthless and made you write an ending which has more closure. And
Right.
there were too many things that were hanging. One doesn't know what happened to Amitabh, one doesn't know what happened to Vivek, or Shashi and Tara make up a bit too easily after spending their entire life in strife. And I didn't at all get the Meenakshi part of it, or the politics of Meenakshi. She came out of nowhere and she disappears. And the politics of the book and the Sevaks. I want you to talk a little more about it, just so that the readers may understand it better, because it left me somewhat hanging and wondering why politics in a book which is really about relationships and so
Right.
strongly.
So to answer your question, Shobhaa, I didn't get bored of the book and say I have to finish now. I think the story that I wanted to say, that finished. And there was no time. I didn't put, when you worked on something for 5 years, I mean, honestly, I would have been, if I had more to write, I would have written for another year. So there wasn't something hanging above my head saying finish now. I just felt that, for me personally, I really I like novels that live on in my head long after they're over. And I wanted to present these two very opposite, two very divergent realities, which are both unsustainable. And, to talk about that, I'll explain a bit about the politics of the book. But so basically, it's Robi Malek, patriarch, is dead, and it's about his wife and daughter finding their way in the world. Coming in their way, parallel to their journey, is the rise of a right-wing kind of fundamental organization called the Mahalakshmi Seva Sangh, which started off as a volunteer organization that wants to protect women. But as we know, it starts off small, but it's increasingly gaining political cachet. So, it's becoming bigger, and things that were just small initiatives become bills in parliament. So that's happening through the book as posters. And for me, the rise of Meenakshi was an exact, like, kind of 180-degree opposite thing to counter that. Here is a fisherwoman, again, a woman with seemingly a very low on the chain of privilege, because, being a fisherwoman, again, she's Koli, so she's, of a scheduled tribe. And here she is commanding first economic power and then political power, and then making a motion for a state run after her. So for me, actually, this was quite deeply rooted it was not a casual choice, deeply rooted very philosophically in Shashi is a scholar of Hegel, and in kind of Hegelian dialectics, he says there is a thesis and antithesis, and then there's a synthesis. These were not his words, but these were his scholars later. So for me, MSS is the thesis, Meenakshi is the antithesis. And you're right, the synthesis is not something I have done. The synthesis for me happens outside of the book. It happens later. So depending on who the reader is, but it's very clear that neither of these scenarios are sustainable. Neither is MSS controlling women sustainable, and neither is this women-led state where men are all tertiary. That's not sustainable. I don't hate men, and they say that as well. I don't want to live really in a state without no men forever. No, but it's just a diametrically opposite thing to happen, so that the branch, that was swung too much one way, you pull it to the other end, so that it can at some point come to the center. So for me, it was very much rooted in a very Hegelian and a very Marxist philosophy, that I am presenting these two views, and now this world of the illuminated will correct itself and come to the center, and that happens later. So I feel maybe as the writer, I also felt that I want to give readers that chance. I wanted to leave that open so that the story would live on,
So two more
Maybe
questions.
it could be my failing as a first time, novelist, that I could present my anger, but not know how to resolve it. But over time, I've actually kind of made my peace with it. I like it. I like, there's a play called Night of January 16 by Ayn Rand, where the audience is the jury. So the audience has to vote and decide whether the mistress or the wife are guilty. And I was fascinated by that idea. So that was what I was going for. I kind of want the audience to decide where they end up.
So two more questions, because we have about 10 minutes left. One is about the cover of your book, which is a cerebral cover. It's the very stylized, stylish cover. I loved it. Was there a debate about what sort of a cover book should have? Were there suggestions?
I also want to open it up because there are these half moons and then they become these full moons, and I love it.
Absolutely beautiful. I love it too.
It's designed by, the kind of head designer at HarperCollins, Bonita Vashimre. There was a lot of to and fro. Again, I think the first options that we had seen, because book writing and publishing, again, it is an industry. So there's a lot of coding about how thriller covers should look, how covers by women should look, how covers for mythology books should look. So I think in the accepted parlance, the cover of maybe a female debut novelist is, it has some face, or it has jewelry, or it has flowers. It has very pleasant, happy colors. It will have purple, pink. And this is global, if you see, there've been like how books by African writers always have a baobab tree, and African writers are now speaking up against it. So this is kind of widely accepted. But specifically, Shobhaa, because my book was about women coming to the light, because I had been told very early on by a very renowned senior international male agent that you should be represented by a young female agent. I was so confused by that, my book is about women, so I should have a female agent. This makes no sense. So I was quite vociferous about the fact that, okay, my book will not have a pink cover with flowers and, a girl with lipstick, and no problem with that. There might be certain books that need it, if it's a YA novel, you need that kind of cover. But I wanted my cover to be, gender neutral. I wanted it to be, if it's my publishers, my editors have called it a novel of ideas. So I wanted it to be a cover that could belong to a Philip Roth book or a Jonathan Franzen book. Why should my book be pretty and pink? Because I'm a woman. I'm wearing a pink sari, so it feels a bit odd to say that. I love pink, no problem. But I was quite pushy
sure about that.
I was quite pushy about that, and I'm quite happy because I you have to live with the cover of your first book for all your life, right? So I'm happy that we have a cover that's quite an art object on its own.
Also, it's quite symbolic because your book talks about the lunar cycle quite a bit. Yes. And it's a dominant theme throughout the book. So it's very apt that you should have a book that says it in a wonderful way without it being.
Also, many moons. I think, again, a lot of people asked if it's about mother and daughter. We had options where there was one full moon. But for me, the book is about women coming together. It's about a collective of women. So I was very excited about having all these moons, and some of them are half and some of them are full, and they're different colored, and kind of talking about that sisterhood, because I feel you have to work hard for sisterhood. It's not really always out there. It's not really available, especially if you're a successful woman. It's not really there. I mean, it's not always there. So you have to kind of work towards it and value it and hold on to it when you have it. So that was important to me. Yeah, the fact about many women coming together.
Well, just to interject a personal note into this, sisterhood for me is the most natural kind of hood to belong to. And I've always been very strongly a part of a community of women. And sisterhood is something I take so much for granted that I don't even think about it. And they're the most important relationships in my life. I've always been with them. So I value it greatly, like you said, and hang on to it and cling with all my might. I don't want to ever let it go. So finally, the last question, it's about the erotic Sanskrit poetry, which is so very beautiful. And it really opened up a new door for me. You sent me a link, and that was the best gift you could have given me. So how did you get into Sanskrit erotic poetry, or you said you're a student of linguistics. So was Sanskrit a part of your curriculum? Because it's a very big part of your book.
Right. No, I never studied Sanskrit formally. As a student of language, as a student of linguistics, I'm interested in both the kind of mathematics and the poetry of language. I'm interested in understanding language. But my grandmother, who, she passed away this April, and the book is dedicated to her, to my grandmother. So she was she was a self-taught Sanskrit scholar. I always found it very interesting that she told me that when she was growing up, she told her father, I want to study Sanskrit. And they're like, just study something easier because, when that'll take years. So, but she taught herself Sanskrit, and she read all the great works, and she's read aloud a lot of the Sanskrit poetry and mythology to me. So I was interested. But the idea for me to bring in Sanskrit into the book is also because one of the things I was very interested in the book is to look at the other side of things, is to look at multiple narratives, is to look at multiple perspectives. And when we think of Sanskrit today, when you mention Sanskrit to someone, you immediately think of Gayatri Mantra or shlokas. But the fact that we have this wealth of political also and romantic and erotic literature in Sanskrit has almost been forgotten. So that was one of the things I wanted to bring up. And as you know, just from reading that one poem, I had such a fascinating time just reading more and more into it. And I hope to always be writing books about subjects that I'm happy researching, because it was a learning process for me. So it was just great for me. And I also wanted to give Tara something hard to study, because while she is a girl of privilege and has certain things easy, I wanted to give her I wanted to kind of show that she's not somebody who's not worked hard. She is a very good scholar. She's picked a subject that it is hard. You can't study Sanskrit just to posture, you can't. So I also wanted to give her something that would show that she really is a woman of great determination, ambition, and intelligence. She's a little confused, but that's because she's 25, and we must allow her that. And maybe in 10 years she'll know her mind better, and maybe she will be the foremost Sanskrit scholar in the world, like she wants to be.
Next book coming up. Thank you so much, Anindita. Such a great pleasure talking to you, and I wish you every success with your absolutely marvelous and luminous writing in the Illuminated. And here's for your next book, and thanks for the conversation.
Thank you, Shobhaa, and I look forward to what you write next, possibly your 25th book, and keep going, because after having written one book, I know what a commitment it is. So I can only imagine what it is to churn out so many. So look forward to what you do next.
Sure.
Thanks so much for doing this.
Bye.